This all went down last Thanksgiving, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what actually happened. Just a heads up, it turns pretty heavy and dives into some brutal family conflict that permanently shattered relationships. Still, there are moments when people have to realize that treating others like trash eventually comes back on them. I've been married to Emily for 4 years. Her family, the Harringtons, are what most would label old money elites. Or at least that's the image they love to project. They live in a sprawling colonial estate with perfectly sculpted hedges, stone walkways, and enough crystal chandeliers to light an entire block. Every detail of their lifestyle screams privilege and polish. From how they host elaborate dinner parties to the way they casually mention their annual trips to Martha's Vineyard. The issue is that I come from a totally different background. My father spent his life in construction. My mother cleaned office buildings overnight just to keep the bills paid. I paid my way through college doing physical labor and slowly climbed the ladder in commercial real estate. It's not flashy, but it's honest work that taught me the worth of every dollar and every contract. From the beginning, the Harringtons made it painfully obvious that I wasn't one of them. It started with subtle digs about where I came from or jokes about how Emily had married beneath her social class. They'd ask when I planned to get a real career in finance or law, completely brushing off the fact that I was doing very well in property management. But the true humiliation happened at family events. Every holiday, birthday, or backyard gathering followed the same degrading pattern. I'd pull into their circular driveway in my pickup, usually bringing an expensive bottle of wine or whiskey as a goodwill gesture. I'd head toward the front door like any other guest, only for Emily to meet me with that apologetic expression. "Kitchen entrance today," she'd whisper, checking to make sure her parents weren't nearby. "You've been working all day and guests are using the front door. You understand, right?" And like a fool, I'd agree and walk around the side of the house, past the manicured gardens and imported stonework, entering through the service door like a delivery guy. Inside, I'd be confined to the kitchen while everyone else socialized in the formal rooms. I'd sit on a stool at the granite island, eating from paper plates while they dined on fine china beneath antique chandeliers. The catering staff would move around me, and I'd overhear Emily's relatives joking about the blue-collar husband who lucked into their family. Emily's father, Thomas, mastered the skill of belittling me without crossing into outright rudeness. He'd pat my shoulder and say things like, "Keep working hard, sport." Or ask if I needed help following the stock market talk in the next room. Emily's mother, Margaret, was worse. She'd smile warmly and suggest I'd be more comfortable watching football in the den instead of joining their adult discussions about politics and business. The worst part wasn't even their arrogance. It was that Emily allowed it. She'd brush it off with, "That's just how they are," or "Don't let them get to you." She never defended me or questioned why her husband had to slip in through the back door at family events. I started to wonder if she was embarrassed by me as well. But here's what none of them knew. What they never bothered to learn while dismissing me as a lucky blue-collar guy who married up. I owned their house and roughly 40 other properties across the state. While they were busy playing aristocrats and sneering at my simple real estate work, I was quietly building one of the most successful commercial property portfolios in the region. My firm, Sterling Holdings, oversees everything from downtown office towers to high-end residential buildings. I hold contracts with the city, long-standing ties with major developers, and a portfolio valued far beyond what their entire extended family could ever imagine. That elegant colonial house they brag about. I purchased it from the bank 3 years ago when they were 6 months behind on their mortgage. Thomas had made a series of disastrous investment decisions and foreclosure was looming. The bank was preparing to auction the place when I stepped in and bought it outright. I allowed them to remain as tenants at below market rent because Emily pleaded with me to protect her childhood home. They had no clue that their landlord was the same man they forced to eat Thanksgiving dinner in the kitchen. So when last Thanksgiving rolled around, I went through the same degrading ritual I'd tolerated for years. I arrived carrying a bottle of aged scotch, the kind that costs more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Emily met me at the front door wearing a cream-colored dress perfectly aligned with her mother's preference for muted, expensive fabrics. "Guests are using the front entrance," she said without meeting my eyes. "You've been working all day. You understand the situation, right?" That familiar knot twisted in my stomach, that blend of frustration and surrender I'd trained myself to swallow. But as usual, I nodded and handed her the scotch, our fingers brushing briefly before she turned away. I walked around to the kitchen entrance, my boots crunching against the gravel driveway they'd had professionally installed the previous summer. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd effectively paid for that driveway through maintenance expenses. I passed their freshly landscaped gardens, imported outdoor furniture, every small detail meant to showcase refined taste to the neighbors. The kitchen was already buzzing when I stepped inside. Caterers dressed in black moved efficiently, setting out appetizers while a massive turkey roasted in their commercial-grade oven. I took my regular seat at the kitchen island, loosened the collar of my flannel shirt, and poured myself a drink from the bottle I'd brought. Sounds from the dining room floated in. Polite laughter, crystal glasses clinking, conversations about vacation properties and private school tuition. I heard Thomas regaling someone with a golf story while Margaret spoke about a charity gala she was planning. No one acknowledged me, even as several guests passed through the kitchen and saw me sitting there like part of the staff. Margaret swept in wearing pearls that probably cost more than my truck. She stopped when she noticed me on the bar stool, eyebrows lifting slightly as she adjusted her cashmere cardigan. "Oh," she said with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "I didn't realize you'd chosen kitchen duty tonight." She gestured toward the dining room where guests sat around the mahogany table beneath glittering chandeliers. The table was set for 12 with silk napkins folded into elaborate shapes and enough silverware to fill a restaurant. "We have plenty of room at the table," she added, though her tone implied the opposite. I kept my face unreadable and took another sip of scotch. "Just making sure everything runs smoothly," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I'd been telling people across the industry that if you want real estate handled properly in this state, you call Sterling Holdings. This man knows every commissioner, every inspector, every legal angle worth knowing. The quiet that followed in the kitchen was so absolute I could hear the old clock ticking down the hallway. Margaret clutched the back of a dining chair, her knuckles turning stark white. Thomas let out a strained chuckle that collapsed before it became real laughter. Marcus glanced at Thomas with a confused look. "Didn't expect the house to be this quiet tonight," he said, motioning at the frozen faces around him. "You folks are usually a lot more lively during the holidays." Thomas's voice wavered when he finally spoke. We didn't realize you two knew each other so well." Marcus's eyebrows lifted in clear amusement. "Knew each other? I wouldn't have closed half my deals this year without Sterling Holdings backing me. Your son-in-law runs one of the most successful property management firms in the region. I trust him with deals worth tens of millions." The word million seemed to linger in the air, heavy and undeniable. I watched understanding slowly register on every face around me. These were the same people who had spent years calling me blue-collar, who sent me to eat in the kitchen while they raised glasses in the dining room, now realizing how wrong they'd been about me. "Actually," Marcus went on, turning back to me with that familiar, confidential tone successful men use when talking business, "I've got a couple of new projects coming up you might want to look at. That waterfront development we talked about, the investors are ready to move forward, but they want Sterling Holdings handling the management side." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through what I assumed were project specs. "We're talking a 50-unit luxury complex with retail on the ground floor, the kind of project that shapes a downtown for the next 20 years. I nodded calmly, fully aware everyone around us was hanging on every word. "Send me the details and I'll go over the numbers," I said evenly, despite the satisfaction rising in my chest. Marcus slapped my back once more. "You're the reason my projects stay ahead of schedule and under budget. Even my competitors ask who manages my properties. I tell them straight, if you want the best in the business, you call Sterling Holdings." Emily finally spoke, though her voice barely carried. You own a company?" I met her gaze for the first time that evening and let the silence sit. "Several," I replied quietly. Margaret's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the kitchen tile, red wine spreading across the white floor like blood. She stared at it, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, caught somewhere between shock and fear. Marcus finally seemed to notice the tension. "I should probably get back to my family," he said, though curiosity was written all over his face. "But seriously, thanks again for everything this year. Sterling Holdings has been a game changer for my business." After he left, the kitchen stayed locked in stunned silence. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, his face draining of color. Margaret knelt to clean the broken glass with trembling hands, her pearls clicking together with each unsteady movement. From the dining room, whispers began to rise, fragments of conversation as guests tried to make sense of what they'd just seen. Someone said my company's name. Someone else asked how long I'd been in commercial real estate, and I could practically see the rigid social structure they'd upheld for years splintering in front of me. Thomas finally found his voice, thin and tight. "You own buildings?" I took another drink of scotch and held his stare without blinking. 43 properties across 3 states, I said. Office buildings, apartment complexes, retail spaces. Sterling Holdings manages about $200 million in commercial real estate. The figure landed like a punch. He actually stumbled back, grabbing the door frame to steady himself. Margaret made a small noise that could have been a gasp or a sob. Emily kept staring at me like I was a stranger, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. In that instant, I understood she truly had no idea who she'd married. She'd bought into her family's version of me so completely that she never bothered to learn what I really did. I rose from the bar stool and smoothed my flannel, feeling more grounded than I had in years. "I need to get going," I said evenly. "Early meeting tomorrow with the planning commission about a new development downtown." I walked toward the kitchen door, then paused and turned back. "By the way, the rent check is due on the 1st of the month, same as always." The looks on their faces were almost funny. Thomas frowned, struggling to follow. "Rent check." I smiled for the first time that night, cold and deliberate. "For the house, Thomas. Your lease payment to Sterling Holdings. 3 years now, even if we've never crossed paths during an actual business transaction." The realization hit hard. Margaret grabbed the counter to keep herself upright. Thomas's face drained to an ashen gray. Emily's eyes widened in pure shock. "You're our landlord," Emily whispered. "I have been since you were 6 months behind on your mortgage payments," I replied. "The bank was ready to foreclose when I bought the property. You're welcome, by the way." That time, I walked out through the front door, leaving them surrounded by the ruins of everything they thought they knew. The air outside was cold and sharp, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, voices rose, confusion, anger, panic as they tried to understand how they'd been so wrong. The following weeks were when it truly escalated. The Harringtons didn't handle the truth well. Instead of reflecting or offering even a hollow apology, they chose to attack. It began with anonymous calls to city inspectors reporting imaginary violations at my properties, fake fire code concerns, fabricated safety issues. Then came the phony online reviews from brand new accounts accusing me of being a slumlord who ignored tenants and cut corners. Someone contacted my insurance provider with vague allegations about my business practices. Anonymous complaints were sent to the housing board claiming discrimination. It was clumsy but coordinated, and I knew exactly where it was coming from. Thomas believed he could intimidate me, maybe force a sale of the house below market value or pull some equally foolish stunt. He misjudged me completely. When you oversee property at my scale, records are everything. I had years of maintenance logs, inspection reports, contractor invoices, and tenant statements. Still, I didn't stop at defense. I hired a private investigator to trace the fake reviews and anonymous reports. It took less than a week to link them to a low-tier PR firm Thomas had hired to handle the mess. They were careless, leaving digital trails all over their sabotage. That's when I decided to end it decisively. I bought a full-page ad in the regional business journal. No flashy design, no buzzwords, just facts presented plainly, backed by documentation. When family turns into a liability, a textbook example of professional sabotage. I never mentioned Thomas or Margaret by name, but anyone in the local business community could easily connect the dots. The screenshots of fake reviews with timestamps, the call logs showing repeated calls from the same number to multiple agencies, even email threads the PI uncovered detailing the coordination behind their campaign. The consequences were fast and unforgiving. Thomas's own development projects began running into unexplained delays. Permits that should have been routine somehow vanished into bureaucracy. City inspectors suddenly became meticulous to the point of obsession with his applications. Investors started backing out of his deals, citing concerns about reputation. Margaret's charity work evaporated almost overnight. The social circles that once competed for invitations to her dinner parties suddenly had prior commitments. Their country club membership was reviewed for the first time in 2 decades. Emily called me every day for 2 weeks, leaving voicemails that began furious and slowly turned desperate. "You're destroying my family," she cried in one message. "This isn't who you are. We can fix this if we just talk. But I was finished talking. I was done pretending their approval mattered. I was done being the man sent through the back door while they entertained out front. About a month after Thanksgiving, Thomas made one final desperate attempt. He called me, forcing a cheerful tone, and invited me to a family dinner to clear the air. Just the four of us, he assured me. No guests, no performance. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity about what scheme he had planned. When I arrived at the house that night, my house, they had set the dining table for four using their finest china and crystal. Thomas greeted me at the front door with a handshake that felt rehearsed, his smile stretched unnaturally wide. Dinner itself was pure obligation. Overcooked chicken, vegetables past their prime, and conversation so stiff it bordered on absurd. Thomas waited until the plates were cleared before making his move. We've been working on a new development concept, he said, sliding a manila folder packed with architectural sketches and financial projections onto the table. Mixed use downtown, retail below, luxury apartments above. We think it could be a real game share for the city. He pushed the folder toward me like it was priceless. Obviously, we'd need a partner with experience and capital, someone who understands the local market and has the right connections. I flipped through the pages, taking in the amateur business plan and wildly optimistic numbers. It was obvious they'd thrown it together in panic, hoping to attach themselves to my success and repair their image. Let me get this straight, I said, closing the folder and locking eyes with Thomas. You want me to risk my company's reputation and capital on a project you came up with last week, after spending months trying to destroy my business with fake complaints and online reviews? Thomas's face reddened, but he tried to stay composed. That was a misunderstanding, he said nervously. Family dynamics, you know how it is. This is business. This is our chance to work together as a family. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Family, I repeated, letting the word linger. Funny how I suddenly became family once you realized I owned your house. Emily reached across the table, her eyes filled with tears. Please, we can start over. Dad didn't mean for things to go so far. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw someone who had spent our entire marriage allowing her family to define who I was without ever trying to learn the truth herself. No, I said softly. We can't start over because this isn't where it began. It began the first time you asked me to use the kitchen door. It began every time they called me lucky for marrying you and you stayed silent. I left the folder on their table and walked out through the front door, feeling like I was finally shedding an old skin. Behind me, I could hear Emily crying and Thomas's voice rising in anger, but I didn't turn around. The divorce paperwork was simple. No shared assets since everything I built existed before the marriage. No alimony because Emily had never contributed to the business. A clean split, quick signatures. The close of a chapter 1 should have ended long ago. Emily signed without challenging anything. I think by then she understood she'd been married to someone she never really knew, someone she never tried to understand because accepting her family's version of me was easier. 6 months later, I ended their lease. Nothing cruel, just a standard 30-day notice stating my plan to renovate the property. They rushed to find a place within their budget, which turned out to be far smaller than what they were used to. Through mutual contacts, I heard Thomas had to take a job working for someone else after his development firm collapsed. Margaret started shopping at regular grocery stores instead of the specialty markets she'd favored for years. They moved into a modest townhouse across town, worlds away from the colonial mansion they once bragged about. The house sits empty now while I decide its future. I've considered converting it into luxury apartments or selling it to a family who might actually value its history. What I won't do is let people live there who believe some deserve the front door while others belong in the kitchen. Sometimes I drive past their new place, a plain 2-story building in a development that would have horrified them 5 years ago. I don't do it to gloat. I do it to remind myself what happens when people confuse kindness with weakness, when they assume quiet competence means you aren't worthy of respect. The Harringtons taught me something important during those years of humiliation and dismissal. They showed me that some people will never recognize your value, no matter how much you accomplish or how patient you are with their ignorance. But they also taught me that building something real, something undeniably successful, gives you the freedom to walk away from those who don't deserve a place in your life. I have a new woman in my life now, someone who knew what I did for a living before she ever learned my last name. She's never asked me to use a back door, never apologized for my work clothes or my truck. When I told her this entire story, she shook her head and said the Harringtons were idiots for not seeing what they had. Marcus still sends me deals, bigger projects than ever. My company keeps growing, and I've never again had to justify why I deserve a seat at the table. I built the table myself, and I decide who sits there. The best revenge isn't getting even with the people who wronged you. It's creating a life so successful and complete that their opinion no longer matters. I spent years trying to earn their respect when I should have been building something they could never take away. Now when I host holidays, everyone comes through the front door.